Welcome to another edition of The Jesse Show. Today my guest is the future Prime Minister of Canada, Mr. Bob Rae. Now, Bob, I was curious to ask you a few questions about the upcoming federal election.
Absolutely, Jesse. Glad
could be months, could be years, who knows?
You never know.
What do you think will be the key issues in the next federal election?
I think that the last election we know was all about protest and was all about punishing the Liberals. I think the next election is going to be as key a sort of a choice between two big approaches. I mean, I don't think there's going to be one issue. I think whether it's Kyoto or Afghanistan, foreign policy, child care, Aboriginal issues, Kelowna, the sensitivity of the government. I think the real question is to people, what kind of government people want. They want to have frankly, a very reactionary, what I call kind of a Republican conservative government, or do they want to have a government that's closer to their values? And that's really, I think, where the Liberals will be strongest in setting out the contrast between them and Stephen Harper.
Now, do you think, given that polarization, that it'll be a nasty campaign with really a lot of mudslinging back and forth, or do you think it'll be relatively cordial?
I don't know. I don't think it'll be cordial. I don't think elections are cordial events. I think there will be clear choices, and I think it'll be, certainly from the Liberals' point of view, I think it would be in their interest to stress positive things they want to do, a vision for the country, hopes that they have, and a sense of appealing to the better instincts that people have. I think that'll be a very strong element in any campaign that I would be involved in. But you know, there's always going to be some negativity, and I certainly would anticipate, because of what I call the Republican conservatives, that they are going to run a tough campaign against the Liberals. I think that's inevitable, whoever is chosen as leader.
Now, one last question, which is purely speculation, but do you have any thoughts on the role the internet might play or other types of grassroots media in the next election?
Well, obviously it's getting more and more important. I mean, part of the problem is that I don't think the people who are running, like me, necessarily really fully understand it. We don't understand the blogosphere that well. We don't understand exactly the potential reach of the internet. But there's a lot of younger people around who do, and a lot of our advisors do. And I think it's going to be more and more important. It's a fascinating kind of context in which to live, because the issues are much broader. People are saying things much more widely. It's not just 24/7 responses. You're going all the time and trying to respond and keep up with the pace of the internet. I think it's bound to have a dramatic effect.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. Best of luck.
Good to talk to you, Jess.
So now for part 2 of our Bob Rae special, I'm joined with filmmaker Robin Benger to discuss Bob Rae's chances not only of winning the Liberal leadership race, but also winning the next federal election. So, Robin, let's start with the Liberal leadership race. What do you think are Bob Rae's chances? And explicitly, what do you think are the main challenges for him to get over the top in the last few months before the campaign?
Well, I should say, first of all, that I was the guy that picked Stuart Smith to be Premier of Ontario, so I'm not the world's best political prognosticator. Personally, I think that there are dark times ahead for Canada and for international affairs, coming out of the post-Iraq era, and I think we need people of substance and people of experience, and I think that Harper is a superficial, inexperienced statesman, and I think that Ignatieff doesn't have the credentials that Rae has. I like the fact that he's run a government. What I particularly like about Bob Rae being something of an internationalist, person who's obviously from somewhere else and is very much interested in foreign affairs, is what he's done since he was in political office is quite remarkable. I mean, I'm not talking about his involvement in the corporate world, but his constitutional development in Iraq, working to develop a new constitution in Iraq, his almost successful attempts at working out a peace treaty in Sri Lanka, his work with the Air India victims. I mean, this is not a guy who just went to Bay Street and took care of himself. He obviously wants to be engaged in the world and sees a role for negotiators. And
with all that said, though, do you think that the Liberal Party will be able to recognize not only the experience, but really, as you say, the international credibility that he'd bring to the job?
Well, these leadership races are, popularity contests, and there's also a sense that the Liberal machine works in sort of predestined ways. So on that basis, I mean, I think Rae is obviously a strong default position right now, but if they're looking for a bit of the Trudeau magic, I think they're looking to Ignatieff for that. And Rae is a bit of a plodder. He doesn't have, incredible charisma. He gave a foreign policy speech the other day, which I went to at the University of Toronto, and it was the best, most comprehensive, most honest public positioning of a national political leader on foreign policy that I think I've ever heard in this country. And it was completely not covered by the media in any serious way.
But maybe that's the problem. I mean, let's sort of go one step further. Let's assume that Bob Rae does win the Liberal leadership. Do you think the Canadian electorate will be able to recognize really that level of depth that he's able to bring, not just to foreign affairs, but to policy work in general?
It's so difficult to tell. I mean, as I say, I think there are some huge crises down the road and around the corner, and we've been living in almost a honeymoon state for a couple of decades now. That a person of Rae's solidity, the fact he's got his feet on the ground, the fact that he's a bit of an engineer of political leadership, should make him a safe and a strong national and credible national leader. Having said all of that, there's a very good chance that the Liberal Leadership Convention might not go for him, and there's a very good chance that in the national election he wouldn't do very well.
Why do you think that?
Well, I remember when he was premier, and he's one of these characters who seems to invoke a kind of an outburst of allergy in the body politic. I remember big billboards up. There was a hate on for Bob Rae. He seems one of those politicians. But I think Bill Clinton was like this in the States, and certainly Hillary Clinton. There's certain politicians who it's easy to get a hate on for. And there's a sector out there that, and it involves in this country too, a right wing which is quite strident and is quite unchecked in terms of its media power, right? So I think there'll be anybody but Rae movement, if it hasn't already started, emanating from the National Post, and anything that anyone like Conrad Black would be involved in.
Right. Almost in a sense that the Canadian right wing would fear Bob Rae as an opponent, because he would be so coherent, he would be so not Stephen Harper, that he could polarize the election to the extent that they would have a very clear choice between two alternatives. Whereas Ignatieff, for example, because he was in favor of the war in Iraq, might be harder to differentiate from Stephen Harper. Do you think that's the case?
I think that the right wing is probably is Harper's to lose, or conservatism in Canada right now is Harper's to lose. I think what's interesting about anything left of that is that you've got now, if you had a Rae-led NDP and another reasonably strong campaign from the Jack Layton-led NDP, and Elizabeth May, who I think is a politician with a lot of upside. I met her and I did work with her in the 90s on global warming, and she is not to be taken lightly. That there's more of a sort of a trifurcated choice for the centrist left Canadian voter.
To the extent that it would divide that particular constituency?
It might. So in a way, Rae's got to try and move to the centre right, and maybe that's an area that he's not comfortable or not naturally capable of swinging. Though I don't know. So much has changed culturally in terms of the internet age that these old boxes of left, right, centre may not hold in the next three elections in this country.
Well, and I mean, let's end on that one question, which I also asked Bob in my interview with him. What role do you think the internet will play in this next federal election? Do you think that it'll have a much greater impact on how politicians and campaigns regard momentum and issues, or do you think it'll be something that's largely ignored by traditional politicians?
Well, my view of the internet is that it's not good for politics and it's not good for national political debate.
How so?
The internet is good for culture and music and youth identity and expression, for which politics, national politics and Canadian politics is really very, very low on their list of interests and priorities. I think the parties will try and be as hip and as connected as they possibly can be on the internet, but I'm not sure the internet crowd is interested. At least the internet crowd that I'm familiar with, through my son, who's a gamer.
Yeah.
A very powerful, quite volatile, but kind of hysterically funny constituency just would find Bob Rae totally oblivious. Well, I think they're not, in terms of the South Park mentality, in terms of Jon Stewart, in terms of the satire of politics, in terms of putting politics in its place, really. Because politics, a la the Canadian party system, grows out of sort of post-war patriarchy. When we were all told what to do, basically. We're not told what to do anymore. So I think that the parties will try and play on the internet. I just think that most people who take the internet seriously and whose life choices are made and influenced by the internet will not be listening.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I should have switched it over to you, sorry.
Oh, that's fine.